Part 5, implications of proficiency testing for teaching. As we've hit those 7 characteristics of proficiency testing, you've probably already been thinking, gee, what does that mean for students in my classroom? Well, in a general way, professional disciplines are often described as having 3 levels of competence, right? Apprentice, journeyman, and master. In fact, we even have master teacher designations in some fields. I said, how would I define the difference between an apprentice, a journeyman, and a master teacher? This is my try. You can add your own definitions, but this is what I came up with. An apprentice teacher knows what to teach, knows the subject matter. A journeyman teacher knows what to teach and how. And a master teacher knows what to teach, when to teach what, how to teach it, and why. That means they know something about the students. They also know what they don't know and are continually learning. It's very often you'll find an apprentice teacher who knows it all. Okay, apprentice teachers often follow this instructional model. They say, gee, the experts have already defined the high-frequency language usages, and they've captured out of that real language everything the students are going to need to know in a textbook. My job is to teach the textbook and then to test whether they've learned the material that I taught. You see that model moving along? Think about this. What test would you use for that model? What kind of a test would you? Achievement test. Gee, what kind of a model would you have for proficiency teaching? Here's an education model used by master teachers. Sure, there's a language needs assessment to define the real-world domains that people are likely going to have to encounter, but there's also a recognition that you can't put all of that in a single textbook, or probably not even in a series of textbooks. So what is the role of the teacher? The teacher is to take the textbook now as a starting point, connect those elements in the minds of the students, and then not be satisfied until you bring it back to the real world domain from which those examples were drawn. The other contrast is the test. Yes, the students take the test, but where do the items for the test come from? Do they come from the textbook or from the teacher? No, they come back from that original set of real world activities, independent of whichever textbook. So if that's the definition of proficiency, then that also has to be the definition of the end goal of proficiency teaching, proficiency-oriented teaching. Okay, so I just gave away the answer. We'll skip by that one. Okay, why is that so important? Well, for me, it goes back to the whole nature of language acquisition. There has to be a starting point. The student can't learn without some language coming from somewhere that they're going to model, acquire. But the first step in that process is called apperception. What's the difference between apperception and perception? Not much. I'm standing in front of a wood-paneled wall here. Without looking behind you, what color is the wall below the window behind you? You all walked in and out of the room, but it wasn't important to you. It didn't make sense. So it didn't make it through this apperception process to be captured in your sensory store. Does that ever happen with our students? You know, the language was there, but it didn't make it through. All right? Notice the dotted lines. This is what's going on inside the head of the student. All right? Combination of semantic and syntactic features linked together to prior knowledge can give a context where the student can recognize, hey, that's important. I need to pay attention to that. If they pay attention to it, then there's what they call intake into short-term memory. Why is short-term memory called short-term? It's gone, right? Very quickly, unless something else happens. Something has to happen to move it from short-term memory over to long-term memory, and eventually internalization. One of the interesting things is to get it into the learner's own language expectancy system takes a lot of iterations, but it's a process that can be accelerated by production. And so those who talk about input hypotheses and so forth, there's now an output hypothesis that says this will accelerate the process. And notice how many boxes there are in dotted lines before you get back to a solid line box. How can you tell whether this process is working? Only by the learner output. Once that comes out, you as a professional are able to do diagnosis and feedback, reinforce, review, or if the indication is it's not working right, you go back to revised input and try again. Right? That is a process that just indicates why doing something like I did today is not adequate for teaching. Especially not teaching languages, right? Making presentations, lecturing about language is not going to help students really acquire the skills they need. It's also notable that practice makes perfect only if it's perfect practice. Only if there's feedback along the way. And language teaching requires a professional level of understanding. A colleague of mine, in fact it was Ted Higgs with whom I wrote the article, had a saying. He said, if native speakers were qualified teachers, were automatically qualified teachers of language, then every person with teeth could be a dentist. What that really says is native speakers have great potential to be the best possible teachers, but just knowledge of the language is not enough. Okay, think about this. How do your students view the classroom activities in your classes? Do they see what's being presented in the class as the end goal or as the starting point? Might even be interesting to talk to them about that. Okay, we're through with parts 1 through 5, and we only have a minute or two, right? Sorry for that. Thank you so much for coming. I'll answer individual questions.